The sneer is gone from Casey's lip, his teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now lets it go. And now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land the sun is shining bright. The band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light. And somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. So if you're wondering what a 130-year-old poem about baseball has to do with keeping reptiles, stick around. There are a lot of different interpretations of the poem Casey at Bat. Some people look at it as a discussion on personal overconfidence. You know, he let 2 baseballs go straight by him because he knew he'd be able to hit a home run and win for the team. Other people look at it as a way of showing even the people you look up to sometimes make mistakes. Yet another interpretation is kind of a lesson in personal humility. And that idea is what links reptile keeping and this video to that American classic. Whenever we watch YouTube, we see the people we like to watch the most, and we get a view of their animals. We get a view of their enclosures. They bring us in so we can get an idea of just how amazing and awesome they're keeping everything. Well, what a lot of people don't realize is that for anybody that's kept reptiles for any amount of time, there were a lot of failures. I would guess that people watching my channel look at the nearly 3 dozen tortoises that I keep, the snakes, lizards, frogs, my outside enclosures, my indoor enclosures, and think, man, that is amazing. He really knows what he's doing. But what people don't realize is the amount of failure that I had to go through, oftentimes at the cost of lives of my pets, to get to the point where I'm at today. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the mistakes that I've made throughout my time as a reptile keeper that have really shaped and molded me and turned me into the keeper that I am today. What you see in front of you are some of the shells that I've kept over time from my pets that had passed away. Some may look at this and see several $1,000s in mistakes. Others may see this as individual lives lost at the hands of a careless keeper. But the way I view these are individual lessons, individual turning points that helped me grow and taught me more about what not to do with my animals. We'll discuss each of these, and I'll go in chronological order, beginning with this box turtle. This is a box turtle that I caught when I was in about 7th grade, and I did pretty well with it, I thought. It lasted about 5 years with me. It died in my senior year of high school. What I was doing successfully is keeping my turtles outside. I had a pretty small yard, so I was just basically able to dig a hole, put a baby pool in it, and put up some chicken wire. And to me, I thought that was just the most amazing setup anybody could ever do. And my turtles stayed out there year round. They were all native stuff that I caught, so I knew they could hibernate and do what they needed to do. As my turtle collection thinned out and I kind of began focusing more on snakes as I got older, this was one of the few turtles that I had left. So I brought her inside. And one of the first mistakes that I made with inside keeping is to let it just roam around my bedroom. My room was decently warm because of all the other reptile cages, so I figured it would make a pretty good environment for her. What I didn't understand at the time was the relationship between temperature and metabolism as it relates to brumation. So basically this tortoise tried to brumate and my temperatures were too warm. So I saw it underneath the bed in the back corner and figured, okay, I'll just leave her alone in springtime. She'll come up because that's what they do in the wild. I really didn't understand that what I had done was basically kept it so warm that she never got to that super slow metabolic state that happens during a true brumation. So her body was still living off of all the fat stores from the food that she'd eaten. And basically, her body basically ate itself to death. And the next spring when she didn't come out, I waited a little while, and when I went and pulled her out from under the bed, I saw what you're looking at here. Of course, I put some nail polish on it, and this is, nearly 30 years ago. And this turtle shell still looks pretty good. But yeah, basically, she had eaten away all of her fat and muscle and looked basically, as you see now, a mummified turtle. And even with that, I really didn't understand exactly what happened, what caused her to die. It wouldn't be years later that I really understood how brumation works in reptiles. Moving on, Later in life, I was probably in my 20s living in Florida, and I had a bunch of tortoises. And this was a sulcata tortoise that was given to me. And I really didn't know much. There really weren't the resources there are today online and as far as books go to really give you a good idea of how to properly care for really any turtle or tortoise. So as you can see, the clear and obvious cause of death was malnutrition. If you don't know, this should be solid here, except for where I glued stuff together. Sorry, that's Gorilla Glue. But you can see where the wider parts had just kind of either never grew or were reabsorbed to add calcium back into its body. And of course, you know, unless it's a pancake tortoise, there should not be an opening in a tortoise of this size in the belly. So this was just me not understanding how supplements work, how proper nutrition works. You know, I had seen in pet stores and heard from people, well, you know, you gotta dust their food with vitamins. And I'm thinking, you know, well, in the wild, they don't dust their food, so why do I have to do it here? Also, that was a little bit of ignorance because I obviously also wasn't keeping these things as they live in the wild. I wasn't giving them all the same foods in the wild, so there was no way that I could have actually been doing well for this animal. And this is the result of it. Around the same time, when I was living in Florida, I had these two. These two actually did very, very well. I got these guys, I want to say, in 2002. This is a male and a female Redfoot Tortoise, and these guys did great. I had a big outdoor enclosure that I made for them. I lived in Florida. The temperatures were perfect. I brought them in on colder nights, and they just did really well. They were an amazing pair. Great tortoises. Well, in 2006, I moved from Florida to Texas. And once we finally got into our house, we had a big backyard, so I let them out. And I'm like, man, they're going to enjoy this yard. There's tons of grass for them. It was 90 degrees that day. And the next day, both of them were barely moving. I'm like, well, what's wrong with them? Did they get into something? Was there poison out here? Was there some kind of fertilizer? And throughout the day, they seemed to get a little bit better, be a little bit more responsive. And then by the next day after that, they were both dead. And that is when I learned a lesson in outside tortoise keeping. A very, very hard and kind of a stupid moment lesson. The temperatures in Florida were pretty stable. So I could leave these guys out. If it was 80 degrees during the daytime, I knew the temperature probably wasn't going to drop too low at nighttime. Where I lived in Texas, in the northern part of it, if it's 90 degrees in the daytime, it can still drop down to 45 degrees at night, which is what was happening. So these guys were getting super chilled and super shocked when I left them outside. And I really didn't know that or understand that. And what kind of was the aha moment was when I was leaving for work early in the morning, and I went outside. I'm like, whoa, I was expecting what I'd been used to. It was really hot the day before, so I was expecting kind of a decent day, and I was cold. I almost went back in to get a jacket, and that's when I realized, holy crap, I'm pretty sure I froze my Redfoot tortoises to death. These guys are tropical tortoises. They come from an area where the temperatures never get lower than the 60s. 2 days of very cold nights and shock was enough to just kill these guys, and it was a very, very sad and disappointing because you can see they were both mature breeding adults, and it was 100% my fault because I hadn't thought to look how different the weather was in Texas, and a gorgeous pair of Redfoots that I slowly killed over the course of 2 days. Over here, we have 2 Redfoot shells, a hingeback tortoise, and there was a 4th hingeback tortoise with this group. I was keeping the Redfoots together, I was keeping the hingebacks together, and then I don't know if I had read something or maybe was talking to somebody, may mentioned how, you can probably keep them together. They're both, forest species. They both, live in the same environments. They eat the same foods. They can both have fruits. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll save some space. I'll just make one slightly bigger enclosure to put all 4 of them in. Within 6 weeks, they were all dead. Why? Well, you can see, look decently healthy. They've got good bone mass going on. After about the first week, everybody stopped eating, which of course is a sign that, hey, something's wrong. Not even bananas or strawberries were tempting these guys to eat. So I knew something was wrong. I put them in a nicer enclosure or a slightly bigger enclosure, I was using the same substrates, I had the same lighting on them, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And so I thought, well, maybe it's just the stress of being with other tortoises that they weren't familiar with. I separated them after about 3 or 4 weeks, and again, within 2 weeks after that, they were all dead. Early on, I brought one of these guys to the vet, and they were doing nasal discharge. There was nothing obviously sick about it. So the vet, they were mostly a dog and cat vet with some reptile experience, so I didn't think I would get a lot from them anyway. But the shell that's missing is one that was sent off to be necropsied, to have an autopsy done so they could run stuff. Well, it turns out that the hingebacks, although they appeared perfectly healthy, had reptilian herpes, which is insanely transmittable. It can be transmitted through the feces, it can be transmitted nose to nose. It's just as transmittable as the disease you find in desert tortoises up here, the mycoplasma. So even though herpes usually occurs in European tortoises, I don't know where this came from originally, so it could have been kept in a big pen with a bunch of different tortoises and that way. So these guys were healthy enough initially, but then the stress of putting all these guys together changed their environment, which then sent everybody crashing down. These guys, I'm guessing, gave it to these guys. It could have been backwards. And that was probably my first lesson in biosecurity and keeping different species apart. Either they come from similar habitats and have similar keeping conditions, it is insanely easy to transmit diseases back and forth. So once more, hard lessons learned at the cost of 4 lives. So now we move on to more current times. Every one of these tortoises here, it's been well over, it's been about 15 years since these guys died. In my more current years, deaths are very rare, but they still do happen. This was the very first mate for Andromeda. Set up, very good enclosure. It was a very healthy tortoise. Everything seemed to be going right. We went on a camping trip for 3 days, and we came back from the camping trip. He was upside down, in the enclosure. He had gotten upside down and cooked himself. Even with better husbandry techniques, better understanding, I just simply wasn't around, so I wasn't able to see him and ride him back over. Now, something that I figured out later on when I acquired a new male is that Andromeda is kind of a bully. So chances are that this tortoise didn't accidentally flip himself. Andromeda was probably pushing him around and banging him around, and that's what caused him to flip. Now again, I might not have seen that particular behavior, but I still would have seen him if we hadn't gone away for those several days. Here we have a northern spider tortoise. This is not Spud. Spud is he's right down there as a matter of fact. But this is a tortoise that I got, and within 3 weeks of having it, it was dead. The cause of death for this tortoise actually predates my ownership, and I'll show you why. You can see back here on the inside of the shell, right around where the pelvic girdle and below would go, there's nearly no bone there. It's almost just straight keratin, and throughout his body, it's like that. This tortoise was basically dying a slow death with its previous owner. Very similar to, what would have occurred with this one, with me a decade earlier. But the stress of the trip and being put into a new enclosure and, just the overall stressors that happen when you move a tortoise were the final nail in the coffin that sent this guy crashing. So again, I was home for a week. I went on a hunting trip out in the middle of Alaska, so very little contact with the outside world. But my wife was able to get a hold of me through my Garmin GPS text to let me know that, hey, the spider tortoise died. And I was like shocked. I'm like, how? We've had it for 3 weeks. There's no way. It's pretty hard to kill something that quickly, especially when you send this enclosure to specifically facilitate an ideal habitat for this tortoise. I told her, put it in the freezer. When I get home, I'll have a look at it. And yeah, this is what I found. Right here, you can see the deossification of its shell tells us that its body didn't get the calcium requirements it needed, so it was pooling from calcium that was already in its bones. So I often joke with people that I've been keeping reptiles for over 30 years, actually closer to 40 years now, but I've been really good at it for about the last 10 or 15. And it sounds funny, but that's actually pretty true. When I was younger, I had very little money. We grew up in a very bad area. So if I wanted a pet, I had to go catch it myself. So when I was younger, I was catching turtles. I really didn't know anything about ecology. I had no idea what kind of impact I was having on the environment around me. I just wanted to catch as many turtles as I could in the summertime, keep some of them, let some of them go. Same thing with the garter snakes around me, water snakes. And then as I became a young adult, I had started my first job, so I had money. I was able to buy a few more of reptiles, so I wasn't out catching them anymore. And I guess like most younger people, I just wanted to have as many and as diverse things as possible. I did have books throughout this time, but there weren't a whole lot of books out there. It wasn't really until the 90s when the little Advanced Vivarium series books came out that really good reptile information was being recorded and distributed to people. And so I bought a lot of those, but the problem was, even though I bought them, a lot of times I wasn't listening and paying attention to what I was learning. I could recite it well enough and tell people the right way to keep things, but I wasn't always practicing what I was preaching when it came to my own personal care or my own personal animals. As an adult, I had a job that allowed me to, get more exotic things, and because I was now spending a lot more money, I was, I think, doing a better job of researching and trying to understand the animals I was keeping. Because not only was there an internal drive, but there was also that outside financial drive to, you don't want to let a $300 snake die in a week. So just that alone could be enough motivation for some people, besides the fragility and sacredness of just life in general. The biggest and most critical turning point in my reptile keeping occurred probably around 2014, 2015. I mean, I got this very beautiful star tortoise in Andromeda at the same time Andromeda's still alive. But what really started changing and shaping my reptile keeping, it was during that year that I was working on a master's degree. Now, it wasn't in reptiles, not even close, it was in education. And of course, earning a master's degree doesn't make you an automatic expert in things, especially not associated. What it did was it really refined my critical thinking. So when I was getting my bachelor's degrees, if I met the page count, I had the right number of resources, and I spelled my name right, I was probably getting a pretty good grade. I learned in my first semester getting a master's that will not suffice. And at that higher level of degree, I was getting challenged by my professors a lot more, like, well, you said this and this person agreed with you, but did you see this? Or did you bother researching this? Did you look for this? And, in one hand, it was really annoying. But on the other hand, when I went to turn my next paper in, I started looking a little more. And that kind of changed how I viewed a lot of things, including reptile keeping. So, of course, when I'm younger, if somebody tells me something about reptiles, especially if they have a couple more reptiles than I have, I'm thinking, that sounds pretty good. It fits into my worldview of things. That's probably correct. Whereas now, if somebody tells me something, especially something new, I find it interesting, but I'm going to go and research it and look for different points of view and see if I can find something to support it or to discount it. What that's also helped me do is to really look deeper, and that's really helped drive the refinement of how I keep stuff. If you guys watch some of my older YouTube videos, you'll see that I was using red lights, because at the time I was still under the impression, because I learned it a long time ago, that reptiles can't see in the red spectrum. So for them, it's just heat and they can't see it. Well, what I know now, and what most other people know now, is that tortoises and turtles especially can definitely see the red light. It's not going to hurt them any more than another light, but to them it's just like a normal bright light shining on them. So when I switched from red lights to the little coil heaters, I saw changes and differences in their behaviors. And then when I started using different heaters for the daytime versus nighttime, different spectrums of light, when I started refining it based off the research that I was reading, the amount of positive change in my animals was just amazing. And that's kind of how I've been since then. One great thing about going to school or working for school is you have access to a library. So in addition to my rather large physical library and 20 plus years of Reptile magazine subscriptions, I now have a huge digital library with research papers on all kinds of things both captive husbandry and field research. Another benefit to, I guess you could say, my evolution in critical thinking was to really challenge the things that I believe or the things that I knew about reptiles. There are some things that are kind of well known, and there are a lot of myths out there that are just, they sound true, so most people's heads they must be true. And so when it comes to keeping, and on top of that, when it comes to presenting information, I try to make sure that what I'm doing and what I'm saying is based in the most current topics. You know, I love books. Everybody knows that I say it all the time. If my house caught on fire, I think I would, I'd get the books out before I woke up the wife. Shh, don't tell her that. But books are static, and the information in a book within 2 weeks of publication may no longer be correct information. And the information that changed could have been something simple, just like a scientific name. You know, for most of my life, this tortoise was Geochelone. This tortoise was Geochelone. This tortoise still is Geochelone. This was Geochelone. Well, now we've got Chelonoidus, we've got Centrochelys, and we've got Stigmachelys, still Geochelone. And that's the great thing about research papers. If you have access to them, they give you a lot better up-to-date information. I talk about my evolution of reptile keeping that you can see just in the last couple of years that I've been down here in Arizona. It's also helped me see things and help refine my tortoise care, help refine the way I make outside enclosures. I think what I'm trying to say is to not get stuck on the first thing that you heard, and to, have a place to leave room in your reptile keeping for expanded ideas and basically just for positive evolution when it comes to caring for your tortoises and your snakes and your lizards and your frogs. I've kind of discussed some of the challenges that I faced as a younger keeper, whether it was my own attitude, my lack of financial resources, my lack of academic resources, or just poor decisions. I think one of the biggest challenges to reptile keeping now is the amount of information out there that's bad information. And if it's presented in a good way, if there's some good graphics, or if somebody uses some big words here and there, a lot of times people think, you know what, that sounds good. So if I give viewers advice is check your sources. One of the things that I like in my comments is when somebody challenges me. They say, hey, you're saying there's books about this, where are these books at? When you're getting a new animal or you're trying to improve the environment of your current animal, try not to take everything at face value. Check the source of where it's coming from. A lot of people think, well, this person's been breeding sulcatas for the last 10 years, they must know what they're doing. And I counter that by saying there's puppy mills everywhere. That doesn't mean that they're taking care of their dogs very well. The natural drive to reproduce is what it is. It's the strongest drive in any living animal. If there's one thing that I could tell my younger self that I would also like to tell to YouTube viewers, to new keepers, to people that have several years, a decade of experiences, to not always take everything at face value and go and do secondary research on your own. What were their sources? And don't always assume that the first thing you learned is the correct thing. Have room in your mind and your keeping for change. So this video, of course, isn't quite as upbeat as most of the videos you see about reptiles on YouTube. Most of those, we're celebrating our successes, but I thought it was very important for people to know and understand that no successes comes without failure. So if you got your first animal and it didn't make it, don't be discouraged. Read more about it, learn more about it. I'm discouraged, and it's taken me almost 40 years, but I've got an amazing setup. My animals are thriving now, and it took a lot of learning for me to get to that place. But even currently, in my current state of understanding and ability to take care of my animals, you can see that just like Casey, sometimes even I strike out. Hope this video has been helpful to you. If you found it interesting, give it a like and share it with your friends. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please do, and check out my Instagram. I update my Instagram a lot more often than I post videos. And again, don't be discouraged by failures, learn from them, try to have a great day, and I'll see you next time.